The Galactic Council chamber hummed with tension as Ambassador Krix slammed his six-fingered fist against the crystalline podium. His yellow eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction as he surveyed the assembled delegates from 47 species. "Fellow beings," Krix began, his voice dripping with false diplomacy, "today we discuss the human problem. These creatures are spread across 12 systems in less than 50 cycles. They consume resources, wage endless wars, and worst of all, they refuse to submit to proper galactic authority." A ripple of agreement swept through the chamber. The Vorthack delegation clicked their mandibles in approval. The slug-like Mulrani oozed their support by changing color from green to purple. Even the crystalline Zephyrite chimed their consent with musical tones. But in the far corner of the chamber, a massive figure remained silent. Commander Thane of the Korvani sat motionless, his 7-foot frame dwarfing the chair designed for smaller species. His pale blue skin seemed to glow softly in the chamber's artificial light, and his forearms rested peacefully on his broad chest. "The Korvani have been silent," Krix observed, his tone becoming sharper. "Surely you agree that humanity must be contained?" Thane's large, gentle eyes opened slowly. When he spoke, his voice was like distant thunder, deep and resonant. "The Korvani do not make hasty decisions, Ambassador Krix. We observe, we listen, we learn." The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the Korvani's reputation. For 3,000 years, they had been the galaxy's peacekeepers. Never once had they initiated violence. Never once had they broken a treaty. They were gardeners, philosophers, and healers. If any species could claim moral authority, it was them. "But surely," pressed Senator Vex of the Caldari Empire, "you cannot approve of their violent nature? Humans have been in space for barely 2 centuries, and already they fought 17 wars." Thane's expression remained serene. 17 wars, yes. But tell me, Senator Vex, how many of those wars did humanity start? The question hung in the air like a plasma bomb, waiting to detonate. Senator Vex's scaled face flushed purple. "Well, that is, the records are complex." "Not complex at all," Thane replied smoothly. "I have studied every conflict. Humans defended themselves against Draconi raiders. They protected civilian transports from skull-biter pirates. They aided the Fenari when your own species, Senator, attempted to enslave them." "Lies!" Vex hissed, his forked tongue flickering. "The Caldari were bringing order to chaos." "Order?" Thane's voice carried a note of amusement. "Is that what you call forcing sentient beings to work in your spice mines? How curious. The Korvani have a different word for that." The tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a vibroblade. Ambassador Krix realized he was losing control of the narrative. "The point remains," he said quickly, "that humans are dangerous. They refuse to follow galactic law. They reject our authority. They must be dealt with before they become a threat to all civilized species." "Civilized," Thane repeated thoughtfully. Another interesting word choice. "Tell me, Ambassador, when was the last time the Korvani were attacked by humans?" Krix's yellow eyes narrowed. "Never, but that proves nothing. They simply haven't had opportunity." "On the contrary," Thane said, rising to his full height. The chamber seemed to shrink around him. 3 cycles ago, a human vessel encountered one of our deep space research stations. The station was badly damaged by a solar storm, and half our crew was trapped. The delegates leaned forward, sensing a story that might change everything. The human captain, a woman named Sarah Chen, could have simply logged the incident and continued on her way. Instead, she spent 4 days organizing a rescue operation. Her crew worked alongside ours, using their crude but effective technology to extract our people from the wreckage. "Propaganda," Krix muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "One of our rescued scientists was my daughter." Thane continued. "She was dying from radiation exposure when the humans found her. Captain Chen personally carried her to their medical bay. A human doctor named Marcus worked for 18 hours straight to save her life." The chamber was dead silent now. Even the Mulrani had stopped their constant color shifting. When we offered payment, the humans refused. When we offered technology, they refused. When we offered alliance, they said they were honored but asked for nothing in return except friendship. Senator Vex's scales had turned a sickly yellow. One incident does not. Shall I tell you about the other incidents? Thane asked, his voice still calm but carrying an undertone that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. The human colony ship that shared their water supplies with a Draconi vessel whose recyclers had failed, the human mining crew that rescued Vorthack survivors from a planet-killer asteroid, the human diplomat who negotiated peace between the Fenari and the Zorn, asking for nothing in return. Enough! Krix shouted. Your naive species sees only what it wishes to see. Humans are a cancer that must be excised before it spreads. Cancer, Thane repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. You know, Ambassador, the Korvani have a saying. The fruit that calls others poisonous is often rotten itself. The insult was delivered so gently that it took a moment for its impact to register. When it did, Krix's face turned a deep shade of red. How dare you? The hegemony has brought order to this galaxy for 5,000 years. We have every right to... To what? Thane interrupted, his voice still maddeningly calm. To demand tribute from weaker species? To enforce trade agreements that benefit only yourselves? To threaten extinction to any who refuse to bow? That is the natural order. Krix roared. The strong rule the weak. It has always been so. Perhaps, Thane said thoughtfully, but the Korvani have been watching the humans for some time now, and we have noticed something interesting. He paused, letting the tension build. In the silence, the hum of the chamber's air recyclers seemed unnaturally loud. The humans have a word in their language. Underdog. It refers to the weak who refuse to stay weak, the beaten who refuse to stay beaten, the defeated who refuse to accept defeat. Thane's four arms spread wide, encompassing the entire chamber. You see, the galaxy has grown comfortable with the current order. The strong rule, the weak serve, and everyone knows their place. But humans have never learned to know their place. That is exactly why they must be destroyed. Krix slammed his fist again, leaving a crack in the crystalline podium. Must they? Thane asked, or are you simply afraid of what they represent? The question struck the chamber like a physical blow. Even Thane's own delegation looked surprised by their commander's directness. Afraid? Krix's voice cracked slightly. The hegemony fears nothing. Then why are you here? Thane's tone remained conversational, but his words cut deep. Why call for the extermination of a species that controls barely a dozen systems? Why demand action against beings who have never threatened your core worlds? Because Krix started, then stopped. The truth was too dangerous to speak aloud. But Thane spoke it anyway, because they give others hope. Because every time a human ship stands against impossible odds and wins, every time a human colony survives what should have killed it, every time a human diplomat chooses principle over profit, other species start to wonder. They start to think. They start to dream. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted accusations and denials. The Vorthack delegation began their war dance. The Malranti turned every color in the spectrum. But through it all, Thane stood serene and unmoved. The Korvani have made their decision, he announced, his voice somehow carrying over the din. We will not participate in genocide. We will not stand by while you destroy a species whose only crime is refusing to surrender their freedom. You side with the humans? Krix's voice was barely a whisper. We side with justice, Thane replied, as we always have, as we always will. The implications hit the chamber like a supernova. The Korvani had never chosen sides in a galactic conflict. They were peacekeepers, mediators, the moral conscience of the galaxy. If they had chosen to protect humanity, you have doomed us all, Krix said, his voice hollow. The hegemony will not forget this betrayal. Betrayal? Thane's laugh was like gentle rain on leaves. My friend, we have been betraying you for decades. Every time you asked us to look the other way while you brutalized weaker species, every time you demanded our silence while you rewrote history, every time you called evil good and good evil, we have been betraying you with every breath we took. But now, he continued, his voice hardening like cooling steel, now we choose to betray you honestly. Now we choose to stand with those who fight for what is right rather than what is profitable. The chamber fell silent again. In that silence, the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. The Korvani fleet stand with humanity, Thane announced. Our ships, our warriors, our technology, all of it pledged to the defense of those who refuse to bow to tyranny. Ambassador Krix stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to smile. It was not a pleasant expression. So, be it, he said softly. The hegemony accepts your declaration. But know this, Thane of the Korvani. When the humans fail, when they fall, when they burn, we will remember who stood with them, and we will make sure you share their fate. Thane's response was a smile of his own. Unlike Krix's cruel grimace, this was a smile of a gardener who had just planted seeds in fertile soil. Ambassador, he said gently, I think you may have misunderstood something fundamental about humans. They do not simply fight to win. They fight to prove that fighting is possible. They do not simply resist to survive. They resist to show others that resistance is an option. He paused, letting his words sink in. You think you are about to crush a rebellion, but what you are actually about to do is teach the galaxy how to rebel. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos was different. This time there was fear in the voices of the strong and hope in the voices of the weak. As the session dissolved into accusations and threats, Thane quietly gathered his delegation and prepared to leave. But before he reached the door, he turned back to face the chamber one last time. Oh, and Ambassador Krix, he called out, his voice carrying over the noise. You might want to check your intelligence reports. The humans have been busy while you have been talking. Very busy indeed. With that, he was gone, leaving behind a chamber full of beings who suddenly realized they might have underestimated exactly what they were dealing with. In the depths of space, human ships were already moving, and they were not alone. #aliens never expected the most peaceful species to side with humanity until they did HFY, the reckoning. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of a U.S. Defiance, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. 3 days had passed since the Korvani declaration, and the galaxy was already reshaping itself around that single moment of defiance. Admiral, called Lieutenant Torres from the communication station, we're receiving confirmation from the Fenari Republic. Their entire fleet is moving to join us at the nexus point. Outstanding, Chen replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. What about the Zorn? Still deciding, ma'am, but their delegation is asking for guarantees about post-war territorial arrangements. Chen almost smiled. Even facing extinction, politicians were still worried about their slice of the pie. Tell them they can keep everything they currently hold. Plus, we'll throw in mining rights to the Kepler asteroids. That should get their attention. Aye, Admiral. The bridge hummed with controlled activity as her crew prepared for what military historians would later call the most improbable alliance in galactic history. On her main screen, the approaching Korvani fleet looked like a constellation of gentle stars, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with soft blue light. Admiral Chen, came a familiar voice over the comm. This is Commander Thane. Request permission to come aboard. Granted, Commander. Docking Bay 2 is ready for you. 20 minutes later, Chen found herself face to face with a being who had changed everything. Up close, Thane was even more imposing than she had imagined. His 4 arms moved with fluid grace, and his large eyes held depths that spoke of centuries of wisdom. Commander, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. I have to ask, why? Why risk everything for a species you barely know? Thane's 4 hands enveloped hers in a warm, gentle grip. Admiral, may I tell you about my people's history? Please. 10,000 years ago, the Korvani were not as you see us now. We were warriors. Brutal, savage, consumed by conquest. We nearly destroyed ourselves in endless wars over resources, territory, pride. Chen listened intently as Thane continued. One day, a child was born. A mutation, they called her. She had the ability to feel others' emotions as if they were her own. Pain, joy, fear, love. All of it flowed through her like water. That must have been overwhelming. It was, but it also changed her. When she felt the agony of those her people had conquered, she could not ignore it. When she experienced the terror of those who faced Korvani weapons, she could not accept it. She began to speak against the wars. Thane's expression grew distant. They called her weak. They said she was a coward, but she continued to speak. And slowly, others began to listen, not because they felt what she felt, but because they saw something in her words that resonated with something deeper in themselves. What happened to her? She was executed by the War Council, but her words lived on. Within a generation, the Korvani had abandoned warfare. We became gardeners, healers, peacekeepers. We swore never again to bring suffering to others. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. And now I see in humanity what that child saw in us. The potential for something greater. The spark that can ignite change across the galaxy. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent chime from the ship's communication system. Admiral Chen to the bridge. Priority Alpha. They rushed to the command center, where Lieutenant Torres was pale with urgency. "Ma'am, we got incoming. The Hegemony fleet. All of it." The main screen shifted to show a sight that defied comprehension. Thousands of ships stretching across space like a metallic plague. Dreadnoughts the size of small moons. Carrier vessels bristling with fighter craft. And in the center, the massive command ship Eternal Dominion. "How many?" Chen asked, her voice steady despite the odds. "Scanning indicates approximately 8,000 vessels, Admiral. Everything from scout ships to planet killers." Chen looked at her own fleet display. 300 human ships, 500 Korvani vessels, and scattered contributions from smaller species. Against 8,000. "Well," she said with a dry laugh, "I've had worse odds." "When?" Torres asked, bewildered. "I haven't, but there's a first time for everything." The bridge crew chuckled despite the tension. It was such a human response that even Thane's stoic expression cracked into something resembling amusement. "Admiral," came a new voice over the comm, "this is Ambassador Krix aboard the Eternal Dominion. You'll surrender immediately or face total annihilation." Chen gestured for the channel to be opened. "Ambassador Krix, this is Admiral Chen. I have a counteroffer." "Oh." "Go to hell." The channel went silent for a moment. Then Krix's laughter echoed across the comm system. "Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. You face impossible odds with a fleet held together by spare parts and good intentions. And you tell me to go to hell. That's about the size of it. I almost regret having to kill you, Admiral. Almost." The channel closed, and Chen turned to her crew. "All ships, battle stations. This is what we came here for. Time to show the galaxy what happens when you mess with the underdogs." The space around the Nexus Point erupted into chaos. Hegemony ships launched fighters by the thousands. Plasma cannons lit up the void with deadly light. And in the center of it all, the human and Korvani fleets met the assault with everything they had. The first wave of Hegemony fighters struck the human defensive line like a hammer blow. But instead of breaking, the humans did something unexpected. They scattered. "What are they doing?" demanded General Vex aboard the Hegemony flagship. "They're abandoning formation." "No," Krix said slowly, studying the tactical display. "They're adapting." The human ships, smaller and more maneuverable than their enemies, began using guerrilla tactics. They struck fast, hit hard, and disappeared before the Hegemony could respond. Behind them, the Korvani ships provided covering fire with weapons that, while designed for peaceful purposes, proved remarkably effective when turned to war. "This is impossible," Vex snarled. 8,000 ships should have crushed them in minutes. "Should have," Krix agreed. "But humans have never been ones to do what they should." As the battle raged, something unexpected began to happen. Other species, ones who had remained neutral, began to arrive. The Fenari Republic fleet dropped out of hyperspace, their ships blazing with righteous fury. The Zorn Collective followed, their bio-ships pulsing with organic energy. Even the crystalline Zephyrite joined the fray, their vessels singing death songs as they engaged the enemy. "How many now?" Chen asked, ducking as her ship shuddered under enemy fire. "Approximately 2,000 friendly vessels, Admiral, and more arriving every minute." Chen felt a surge of hope. It's working. The galaxy is waking up. But the hegemony was not finished. Krix, recognizing the danger, ordered his most devastating weapon brought to bear. The Eternal Dominion's main cannon, a planet killer designed to crack worlds, began to charge. Target the human flagship, he commanded. End this farce. The weapon fired, a beam of pure annihilation that could reduce a planet to dust. But as it reached for the Defiance, something impossible happened. The Korvani flagship, the Peaceful Dawn, moved into the path of the beam. No! Chen screamed, but it was too late. The beam struck the massive Korvani vessel, and for a moment, it seemed as though nothing could survive such devastation. But then, impossibly, the ship began to glow, not with a fire of destruction, but with the soft blue light of Korvani bioluminescence. Energy absorbed and converted. Came Thane's calm voice over the comm, returning to sender. The Peaceful Dawn's hull opened like a flower, revealing energy projection arrays that Chen had never seen before. The stored power of the planet killer beam, amplified and focused, lanced out toward the Eternal Dominion. Impossible, Krix roared. Our intelligence said they had no weapons. They don't, Chen said, understanding flooding through her. They're gardeners. But sometimes, gardeners have to deal with weeds. The return beam struck the Eternal Dominion's shields, overloading them instantly. The massive ship began to list, its hull cracking under strain and containing its own weapons. All ships, Krix commanded desperately. Concentrate fire on the Korvani vessel. But it was too late. The sight of the Peaceful Dawn absorbing and redirecting the hegemony's most terrible weapon had a profound effect on the battle. Species that had cowered before hegemony might for millennia suddenly realized that the giants could bleed. The tide of battle turned. What had been a desperate defense became a rout. Hegemony ships began to flee, their crews abandoning the fight rather than face the wrath of a galaxy that had finally found its courage. Admiral, Torres reported, his voice filled with awe. Hegemony forces are retreating. All sectors report enemy withdrawal. Chen slumped in her command chair, hardly believing what had just happened. Casualties? Surprisingly light, ma'am. The Korvani ship seemed to have some kind of defensive field that protected nearby vessels. Of course they do, Chen said, shaking her head. Peacekeepers would naturally develop ways to protect others. Admiral, came Thane's voice over the comm, request permission to come aboard. There are matters we should discuss. An hour later, Chen and Thane stood together on the observation deck, watching the aftermath of the battle. Debris from destroyed ships floated like metallic snow, while rescue shuttles worked to save survivors from both sides. You saved us, Chen said simply. No, Thane replied, his voice thoughtful. You saved yourselves. We merely chose to stand with you. The galaxy will never be the same. No, and that is as it should be. The old order was built on fear and oppression. Perhaps it is time for something new. Chen nodded, watching as ships from dozens of species work together to clear the battlefield. What happens now? Now, Thane said, we begin the hard work of building a better galaxy. One where strength is measured not by the ability to destroy, but by the will to protect. Where power comes not from conquest, but from cooperation. That sounds like something humans can get behind. I thought it might. Thane's expression grew serious. But there will be challenges. The hegemony will not accept this defeat quietly. They will regroup, adapt, return stronger than before. Let them come, Chen said firmly. They'll find that freedom is contagious. And once it spreads, it's impossible to stop. As if to prove her point, the communication system chimed with incoming messages. Species after species, worlds across the galaxy, were declaring their independence from hegemony rule. The rebellion had begun. You know, Chen said with a grin, I think Ambassador Krix was right about one thing. We humans really are cancer. How so? We spread. We adapt. We survive. And we teach others to do the same. Thane's laugh was like music. Then may the galaxy be infected with such a cancer. It could use the cure. As the two unlikely allies stood together, watching the birth of a new galactic order, Neither could have imagined that their meeting would be remembered as the moment when the age of tyranny ended and the age of freedom began. But sometimes the most powerful changes come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the most peaceful species make the most effective revolutionaries. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, as Thane had said, was as it should be. The underdogs had won. But more importantly, they had taught everyone else that winning was possible. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.